David, it's a real pleasure to sit down with you, and I guess we should start by letting you tell us your name and where you live and when
All
you
right,
were appointed.
I'll give it a little background. I'm David Baker, been a magistrate judge in Orlando since late 1991. Grew up in Virginia, practiced in Wisconsin and Florida with Foley and Lardner before being appointed to the bench, and currently I'm serving on recall both in the Middle District of Florida and the Middle District of Alabama. And we can talk about that some more later as we go through.
Sure. What caused you to apply to be a magistrate judge?
Well, I had clerked in the district court in Norfolk in the Eastern District of Virginia and enjoyed the judicial side of things, and then went into litigation. And I think, like most litigators, there's at least some part of you that wants to be a judge. Some obviously it wouldn't suit them by temperament or other reasons. But my family's had a history of public service. My father was Assistant Secretary of Agriculture in the 60s and worked in the Capitol Hill for a while. So it was a little bit of that was in my blood, I think. And again, I think what draws a lot of magistrate judges, probably district judges too, is the lifestyle. You get control over to some degree, compared to litigators. We get to set the schedules, and that's a nicer way to live. I certainly found that to be true for the last 27 years.
Sure, and I'm sure like many of us, you weighed the pros and cons of leaving the private sector. What would you say was the greatest pro and the greatest con?
Well, you obviously give up some money, and certainly money on the upside, but I've never wanted a lavish lifestyle, so that wasn't too big a deal. Having control, not having to argue a case simply because you've got a client who's got an arguable case, but decide on what you think the merits. It just suits my personality better, and I sure don't miss timesheets and billing and collections, which from my observations since I've gone on the bench has gotten even worse in terms of the pressures on law firms and lawyers. That it's frankly discouraging, and I'm glad I don't have to deal with that part of it except reviewing fee petitions.
And where did you go to school?
Went to undergrad at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at UNC, and then University of Virginia Law School.
Oh, that's a great school. How did you choose those schools?
I can't quite remember about Carolina, except I didn't want to be too close to home. I grew up in Arlington, but I didn't want to be too far away. And at the time, even for out-of-state students, it was quite affordable. And my folks could help pay for college, but trying to do an Ivy League or something really wasn't fair to my brothers and sister. So it seemed like a good choice. UVA, at the time, in-state, because I was still a Virginia resident, was almost free. I mean, it was ridiculous, and they even gave me a scholarship. So that was easy because it was one of the top-ranked schools, and again, just a beautiful place to go to school and great professors.
Sure. So you mentioned briefly at least part of your father's career. Were there any lawyers in your family?
My uncle, who we weren't real close, but we, got together from time to time, was taught at Harvard right out of World War II, having been in the Navy, and taught admiralty because he'd been in the Navy, but he didn't know any admiralty law. But and he ended up as dean of the law school at Case Western, and then president of Case Western, and finally went into private practice at age 65, I think, in Columbus with Jones Day. So, but I never much talked to him about the law. We just talked more about hiking and geology.
Was he alive when you were appointed?
No, when did he die? He died fairly young. His wife was still around, although she had some dementia toward the end. And I think she was dead before I was appointed too.
Do you remember where you were when you got the call?
I was home, just.
Were you surprised?
I felt pretty good. There were other very well qualified candidates, including 2 who have gone on to be judges on the finalist of 5. But I felt pretty good about it, and I was pretty sure they were looking for somebody with a civil background to manage cases, because at the time the Middle District of Florida was underwater with a caseload, and there were no new judgeships on the horizon. And the other 2 who were really good were assistant U.S. attorneys, again, very well qualified, but they wouldn't have any special expertise on moving those civil cases.
And prior to going on recall, were you in the Orlando division the whole
Yeah.
time?
And occasionally we'd sit elsewhere, but our divisions are set up that we pretty much stay at home unless somebody's sick or something.
And at the time of your appointment, did they have what we call now the baby judge school?
Yeah, we were looking at some of these possible questions. The baby judge school, what confounded me most was I didn't know the difference between the AO and the FJC at the time. And
I don't think you were alone.
well, I know, but it was extremely confusing. And at the time, the AO and the FJC didn't get along well. The directors fought. They didn't like each other. And the particular issue of contention was automation education, because the FJC does education, the AO does automation, and automation was in its infancy. And I love automation. I've been active in it ever since. And so I kind of got caught in that conflict to see the different personalities as we were trying to figure out how to carry out the automation and get judges to buy into it. This was before email, before the World Wide Web, before Windows, before GUI interfaces, networks, none of that existed then. But we did have computers, and all of that was coming. And some people had visions of it, and then we had to figure out how to fund it, get people trained, and then stop the fighting between the FJC directors and the AO director.
So where was your, did you have phase 1, phase 2 of baby judge school back then?
We did San Antonio and Washington. I think ours was maybe the last one in the Dolly Madison building, which is across from the White House. The FJC had most of their stuff there, and they were little tiny rooms. It was nothing like it was before the move to the new building. But I still remember the confusion, because you had to do 2 vouchers for payment for 2.5 days on the AO's dime and 2.5 days on the FJC's dime.
Did you maintain friendships with your colleagues from your class?
I did. In fact, one of the funny little anecdotes, it was a February, DC, which is usually chilly, but it was colder than usual, and I wanted to go for a run even though it was cold, but I hadn't brought a sweatshirt or anything. But one of my colleagues from Madison, his wife, was going back home, and she had a sweatshirt, so I borrowed hers, and she was my size. She was a larger than average woman. And so I got to borrow her sweatshirt and mail it back to her. So that was camaraderie right there. And it's been fun over the years to see some of them get elevated to the district bench, which I didn't, but got close a couple times.
So you did apply?
I did apply and got interviewed at the White House and with the senators various times. And again, I thought I had a pretty good shot a couple times, but it's a lot of mystery to that process. And I feel lucky with the district judges we have in the Middle District of Florida, even the ones who may have gotten appointed over me. Can't say they're not qualified. I mean, they're hardworking, diligent, intelligent people with the right temperament. So I feel bad for myself, but I don't feel bad for the system. It seems like, at least a reasonable decision was made, even if I would have decided it otherwise.
So at the time you were appointed, did you have any children old enough to appreciate the significance of your appointment?
Well, the kids were still fairly young, and we tried to explain to them what the differences were going to be and all of that. And the cutest remark was my son, who was, I guess, 9 at the time. And he said, "Let me get this straight. You're here as a lawyer," because I was a partner at a big firm, "and you're going to go in and be a judge at here." And I said, "Yes, that's right. But, things can happen, and there's other differences too. But he had a pretty acute awareness of what things meant, even at age 9.
And what does he do now?
He travels most of the time. He's a business consultant, and as a result, we end up with his dog 4 days a week, which is not my favorite thing, but I can tolerate it.
So over the years, I would imagine that your responsibilities as a magistrate judge have changed. And of course, with the advent of computers and internet and the World Wide Web, obviously, the way you do your job has changed. And you've been in the system for a long time, so you bring a unique perspective. I wonder how you could describe in the limited time we have.
Well, I could geese quite a bit about the computers,
Well,
but
this we know.
but I'll start with when I in Orlando there was one magistrate judge at the time, and he did mostly criminal because he was the only one there, and he didn't.
Now, just
There's 4, 2 of whom are retiring in the next year to join me, but. As a result, he did some discovery disputes, but not much else. No case management, no cases on consent to speak of. And when I came, that's what I was looking to do, was manage the cases and move the dockets. So it completely changed how the magistrate judges were perceived in Orlando. And that's only grown as we've gone to 4. Of course, Florida, as you know, is a growing area, and particularly Central Florida. But even on the computer front, we did have a computer. They were fairly new, and I got the newest one in the building because they had to buy a new one, and it had the whole computer had 40 megs of RAM, not gigs, megs, and it was DOS machine with WordPerfect 4.2 and 5.0.
how big was it?
It was one of those beige towers, and or may have been flat, but with a green screen. It wasn't. There was no color, and it wasn't connected to anything. You had a modem to dial up to get Westlaw. We had that trivia question about the one in Yellowstone that he got the 92 the following summer. But those most of the rest of the judges had already had those for a year or 2 or more. But that's how you communicated. There was no email and I remember I was teaching at University of Central Florida legal ethics to undergrads at the time, just on Saturdays. And there was a class in Unix programming. And it was right after mine, and I asked the professor if I could sit in. He said, if you can find a seat, you're welcome, because the room was pretty full. But that was my 3rd year on the bench, 3rd year teaching. And that was when the World Wide Web began. And the professor changed the curriculum in mid-semester to start teaching web programming, which didn't exist until then. I was very impressed with him. And then the same thing was going on in the judiciary. Then the computer started having color interfaces and a mouse and connections to email. And I was involved working with AO committees and groups to help develop the needs and the educational requirements and set up some of the programs in San Antonio, and then convincing judges it was worth turning the machines on, learning how to use them. Chaser came in at the same time when I started, which I don't know if they were still using that when you were around or if it had been replaced already. That was the first where we could view the dockets.
Is that a precursor to Pacer?
It was the Chamber's version of Pacer, which and Pacer was at the same time for the lawyers. But this, you could get your motion reports and you could look at dockets, and after about 4 or 5 years, based on an idea from one of the systems folks in Nebraska, they figured out how to start scanning the documents and putting those with the docket entries so you could actually read the documents. That was a new thing. And before that, the only way a judge knew a motion was pending was because a docket clerk brought it up to them. And with district judges and magistrate judges working on the same file, even finding the file, might be sitting on a district judge's law clerk's windowsill gathering dust. And there'd be this stack of pleadings that hadn't actually gotten to the file yet. They'd be recorded, but not scary stuff and hard to work. And so that's part of the revolution, along with all the other things that came along, eventually coming into CMECF and the courtroom technology and video conferencing and the network and the VPN and remote computing. I still remember our chief judge was not very supportive of technology, didn't understand it. Our clerk wasn't either. And when he took senior status and spent time up in North Carolina most of the year, and they set him up with some of the early remote access things, suddenly the next time we saw him at the annual meeting, he was talking about connection rates and how to do this and do that, and he was proficient suddenly. And it was important to him. It let him keep a docket and spend time in North Carolina.
Do you find it frustrating when you're dealing with people that don't get it? I mean, you get it, clearly, and I've seen you mentor other people or try to teach them, but there is this universe of people that just don't get it. It's like looking at a very complicated math equation and they sort of shut down.
Well, I get frustrated with people who aren't willing to at least understand that if they will take the time to learn it, it can make their lives easier and much more efficient. And I've gone through that with various folks at times. But it can be frustrating when the system rolls out something new, a new whatever it is, and they don't have the right training and support. And I think it's inappropriate, given the other resources we have, to expect 400 or 500 magistrate judges and 1,000 district judges and however many circuit judges, each of them to teach themselves. That's crazy. And we do have programs to teach, but just saying this program has this capability, I think the teaching ought to be, here's how you should use it, and here are your choices on setting it up, depending on how you get your work done. And I've been lobbying that for 25 years, and we haven't quite got there yet. Occasionally we do, but we're going to have it again as we come to the new Microsoft Office rollout. I was talking with some of the folks today. So, people do it their own reason and their own rates. It was really hard in the early 90s, mid-90s, to get people to think it was worth their time to stare at a screen. But between the World Wide Web and email with grandchildren, we got even the older judges, and then remote access as it got better and better and better. The transition's been amazing to watch and fun to be part of. It's one of the things I'm really proud of. It's sort of the non-legal part, but it's certainly I feel, sorry, I hit the mic.
Speaking of a transition.
One of the things, that I'm proud of, my contribution to the judiciary.
Sure. And then you have a reputation, no doubt, among the magistrate judges at a minimum and potentially on a larger scale. But speaking of a transition, you've recently transitioned to recall status. I say recent, it seems recent to me.
It's coming up on 2 years now.
2 years, okay.
And
so a lot of times when, at least in the Northern District of Florida, recall judges tend to stay in the Northern District of Florida, but I know you've been working in Alabama. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing on recall?
My original plan was to just have recall without staff, and I'd help out, take some duty days and weeks, and do some other administrative things that the chief judge asked me to do. And I did that the first year, but at the same time, our colleague Susan Walker from Middle Alabama asked me to consider recalling there, and it's a slightly different process to do it in a separate district. And there are some other people who have 2 recalls. And in that one, I've got staff, law clerk in Montgomery and one in St. Pete, former law clerk for the Middle District of Florida, who's trying to find another career position. And the trouble is, for Montgomery, Middle Alabama, is they've only got 1 active district judge, and they've got 2 vacancies that have been there for years. And so the magistrate judges are doing everything, and lots of consents, lots of summary judgment motions and other dispositive motions. So they just needed help. And I agreed to do it now. And again, that's where I don't think I could physically do it absent the computers and telephones. Doing hearings by phone, having the remote access to the dockets and the documents, being able to do my rulings electronically. But with them, I've made, it's probably 6 or 8 trips for usually about a week, where I bunch up a bunch of hearings. But if I had to be there full time, I wouldn't want to do it. I mean, I like living in Florida. Nothing wrong with Montgomery. Plenty of people enjoy it. I've enjoyed visiting, but it's not where I'm from. It's not where I live. It's not where my family is. So being able to just go up there once every couple of months for a week and then do everything else remotely it's been remarkably productive.
So are you considered handling a 70% load with 2 staff members?
Yeah, and it's again, from my perspective, if I'm going to do that, recall work, if you get to pick, it's all civil, and I do still some criminal stuff in Florida, but no Social Security appeals, which I sort of feel like I've done enough of over the years. No prisoner cases, no pro se. These are the heavy-duty, contested, big stakes civil things, civil rights, contracts, taxes, all the usual stuff we do.
How long do you intend to keep up that pace?
Well, the idea was until they get their 2 judges confirmed, and they've got 2 nominees, but as we just heard from at the update, we don't know if the district judges are ever going to get a vote. And so they're sitting there, and they're near the top of the list. One complicating factor is one of the other nominees is a sitting magistrate judge from Montgomery, and to be for the Southern District of Alabama. So as soon as they get the 2 district judges, they'll lose a magistrate judge. So I'll have to talk to the chief judge there. I thought it would be, 5 or 6 months when I started. Well, now it's over a year and a half, and I think it'll certainly go to the end of the year. The chief has to continue getting funding for the law clerks and authorization from the circuit. I expect I'll go into next year before they get it cleared up, politics being what it is.
It's admirable. I know a lot of judges are looking to slow down a little.
Well, I would have, if I had to choose, I'd prefer a little bit less, but its cases have certainly been interesting, and they're great people to work with.
So it's changing gears a little bit. What would you say has been your funniest experience as a magistrate judge?
I don't know how funny it is, but we've certainly gotten some amusement about it over the years. I had 2 cases fairly early on. One was a petty offense from the Canaveral seashore, and the superintendent of the seashore, the National Park Service superintendent, really didn't. There's a nude beach there, and from time to time it would get a little out of control, and the town that's nearby would complain, and the superintendent hated it. It really bothered him. Some of the other rangers didn't care very much as long as they picked up their trash. But so he and the mayor sort of started this campaign. They issued a bunch of tickets for public nudity under Florida law, which was applied by assimilation. And Florida Supreme Court had ruled not too long before that simply being nude without conduct was not a violation of this particular statute. So I followed that opinion. I felt bound by it as interpretation of Florida law, and dismissed all the tickets. And we called it the nude but not lewd opinion, and that got some play. The other one also involved the beach. We had a pleasure vessel that had cut the shoal too sharp and grounded and flipped over, and the salvor salvaged it and made a claim, and the owner was a lawyer, state court lawyer. I don't think he'd been in federal court, but with a reputation, fairly well known. He was contesting it, and it was covered by insurance, so the whole thing was a little strange. And the salvor did a good job. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn good. Saved the boat from being wrecked because it was stranded out there. And we ended up, it's the only time that I really wrote a humorous opinion. And we did it with poetry, set to the tune of Gilligan's Island, as well as a couple of British sea chanties. And the lawyer lost, had to pay some costs and things, but he loved it. It made his reputation for some reason. It struck everybody just right. There's so little humor in what we do. I never crack a joke from the bench, particularly not in a criminal case. Even if something is humorous, there's just nothing funny to that criminal defendant and to most of the litigants. So that was one time I chanced it and got away with it, and it worked.
Oh, that's great. It seems like the right case for that, too.
Yeah.
So that might be among one of your more memorable cases, but any others stand
Well, I was thinking about that. There was one we had, it was a criminal prosecution, a guy charged with drug dealing and some other things. And we had this parade of witnesses, a whole bunch of whom were jailhouse snitches. And they didn't sound right. Didn't even sound like they could have seen what they said they saw, or that this guy would have talked to them while they were in a nearby cell. None of it made sense. And district judge was perturbed about it. I was perturbed about it. And defense counsel was a highly competent, energetic, professional lawyer that raised some questions. So we ended up requiring them to submit all sorts of information about what the agent was doing and talking to these different people. It turned out there were undisclosed preferential treatment. There were, I can't say definitively, but we concluded that it was more likely than not that there was, a lot of this stuff was just dummied up, is made up. And it took a lot of work for me and my staff and for the district judge to review all this. And we set aside the conviction. Now, there was something funny about the guy. He may have been guilty of something, but there wasn't much direct evidence. He did some other suspicious things, but he was also a community leader in some other areas. So it was a very sensitive case. So, the diligence we put into that to reach justice, I felt pretty good about.
And that's something that's
And
quite rare in federal court,
and
of course.
there was a long, slow process afterwards of the U.S. attorney getting reported to the Office of Professional Responsibility, and he eventually resigned. He was lazy anyway.
Let me ask you just a few more general questions, and then, of course, give you the opportunity to make some concluding remarks if you want. But just curious how long you plan to stay on recall, whether that's just sort of indefinite. I think you might slow down from 70 to 40. And if you do go off a recall, what you'd like to do in a real retirement.
Well, okay. In terms of the recall without staff and just pitching in as needed, I'll probably keep doing that as long as I'm feeling healthy and we don't decide to move for some reason, which I don't anticipate. Because it doesn't cost the judiciary much of anything except paying for my phone, and it's nice to have that phone
And your computer.
and the computer
Because we know you'll have the computer.
well, and I mean I actually dread the notion of having to I've got, like I think most of us, there's some stuff on the office computer that's mine. I mean, I've got copies of photo albums and other things for preservation. I'll have to figure out how to move all those things and get some advice about how to do that. So I kind of dread that. So, and it's nice to have an office to go down to, even if I only do it once or twice a week. And we've got the space in Orlando, and I think we'll continue to for quite a while. So I may do that, into the 70s, into my 70s. We'll see. The Alabama stuff, it'll have a natural ending when they get those confirmations. But I'm gonna have continuing discussions with Chief Judge Watkins about what we're doing in the meantime. But I'll probably at least go to the end of the year and probably into March if they need it. See how they're doing. And what I do afterwards, that's part of it. I don't have a real plan. I enjoy reading and traveling and hiking and music and cooking and those things, but I pretty much do those, fairly well with the schedule I've got. I mean, that's the thing with the resources we have. I was up in North Carolina for 3 weeks just before the workshop, and I probably entered 20, 25 orders, and some on little motions and some actually some pretty significant opinions. So you can keep up even if you're out there hiking and watching waterfalls. It's a lot of things are going bad in the world. That's a good thing, That's the way I feel about it.
So there's a suggested question to use at the end of the interview, which I don't like the way it's phrased, because it says, how would you like to be remembered, which sounds kind of ominous. And I always thought to myself, how would I answer that?
It is hard to write your own legacy. I'd like to,
But
again,
it's-
as I mentioned earlier, I feel proud of my contributions on the automation front, which I think made a difference in some areas. Again, not always just the way I would like to do things. You're working with the bureaucracy and all sorts of limitations and different people doing things different ways. But, I feel like I helped us move forward, not me alone by any means. A couple district judges, both passed away now, who I think deserve tributes and are almost forgotten with what they've done. But so I feel very proud of that. And then the usual, I think, that most of us feel, that those of us who, which is pretty much everybody in the room downstairs, taking pride in how you approach the job every day in terms of diligence and integrity and intelligence and fairness. And looking back, I can't say I'm perfect, can't say I did everything right, but I feel pretty good, how I'd score up on those things. And if that's how people recollect my term of office and making things work a little bit better, I'd feel pretty good about that.
I think that's the way people view your work, David. And I'm glad that I'm the one that got to interview you.
Well, it's always good chatting with you, Liz.